Hi guys, this is a video to help you review how to do tabular division. I'm just looking at a couple problems on page 13 in our notes that we did together, but I thought the video would be nice to look back at. If we're dividing something like 4x cubed plus 5x plus 10 divided by 2x plus 3, we got to think of a couple things. First, look for any missing terms. I've got 4x cubed plus 5x. Technically, there's a plus 0x squared in there that I'll have to take into account when I do my setup. Now, the number of rows is always equal to one more than the degree of the divisor, which is the polynomial doing the dividing. The degree, which is the highest exponent on a variable in this, is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, so I'm going to have 2 rows. In order to figure out the number of columns, I'll do a little math here, and what I'm going to look at is the x cubed and the x. So I'll take the x cubed divided by x, and that gives me x to the second power. Okay, the degree of that result is 2. I'll add 1 to that, so that means I'll have 3 columns. So now let's do our setup. Now the dividend, which is the one getting divided, he's going to wrap around the outside of my setup here. The divisor goes on the right. So divisor tells you the number of rows, goes on the right. Okay, so now I'm set up and ready to divide. The first thing you're going to do is take this 4x cubed and move them into the first slot here. Now you have to think 2x times something will give me 4x cubed. Okay, 2x times 2x squared will give me 4x cubed. Okay, once I have this top number, I can then finish out the rest of this column by using multiplication. 2x squared times 3 will give me a 6x squared. Now, these two boxes need to sum together to give you a 0x squared. So what has to go here so that when you add it to 6x squared, you get 0x squared? Okay, so that has to be a negative 6x squared. Okay, then the process starts over. 2x times what will give you a negative 6x squared? Must be a negative 3x. Okay, so then negative 3x times 3 will give you a negative 9x. And now we're going to look at the next set here. These two have to sum together to give you 5x. Okay, so 14x, if you were to then add it to a negative 9x, will give you a positive 5x. Okay, so then lastly, 2x times a 7 will give me 14x. 7 times 3 gives me 21. Now, we talked about in class that if these two numbers were the same, then that would mean I have a remainder of 0. But since they're not, I have to do a little bit of math. The process that we do is inside plus some remainder gives you the outside. And I want you guys to always write out this equation rather than doing it in your head, because there's a likelihood that you'll accidentally do it backwards. Okay, so just doing some subtraction, solve for r. R is equal to negative 11. Okay, but you're not done. You still have to account for this remainder up in your final answer here with the quotient. So we're going to do minus 11 all over the divisor, 2x plus 3. Okay, so that's the quotient plus the remainder divided by the divisor. Technically, we're doing minus the remainder because the remainder was negative. Okay, so because we got a remainder here, is 2x plus 3 a factor? No. we got a remainder. If the remainder was 0, then we'd know it would be a factor, but that's not the case. Okay, so going on to the next one that we did in class. Okay, look out for any missing terms. There's technically a plus 0x in there. The number of rows is 1 more than the degree of the divisor. Okay, the degree looks like it's 2, so 2 plus 1 gives me 3. Columns. We're going to look at the x to the 4th and the x squared. Okay, subtract those exponents. I get x squared, 1 more than that, gives me 3. So that means I'm going to have a 3 by 3 grid. Okay, now remember the dividend, which is the one being divided, goes around the outside. Okay, and then technically there's a missing constant term, so we'll do plus 0. The divisor goes along the right. Don't forget to include the 0x. Okay, move the x to the 4th and the 1st. X squared times x squared will give me x to the 4th. Okay, now you're multiplying. X squared times 0x gives you technically a 0x cubed. And I like to include the x cubed as a placeholder because it should match this x cubed right here. X squared times 2 gives me 2x squared. Okay, now remember these two boxes have to sum to give me 11x cubed. So this must be a negative. Oops. Excuse me. This must be a positive 11x cubed, right? Because then those sum together to give you 11x cubed. Okay, process starts over. X squared times a positive 11x will give you 11x cubed. Okay, so then multiply. I get 0x squared and then a 22x by 11x times 2. Okay, now 2x squared plus 0x plus something must give me 50x squared. So this must be a 48x squared. Okay, then lastly, x squared times a positive 48 will give me 48x squared. 48 times 0x gives me 0x, and 48 times 2 gives me 96. Okay, so a couple things to note here. These don't match, so that means I have a constant remainder. So 96 plus some remainder gives me 0. Okay, so negative 96. Also, take a look at this diagonal. 22x plus 0x does not give you 120x. So that means we have to account for that in our remainder. So 0x plus 22x plus some remainder gives you 120x. Okay, so when I solve for r in terms of x, I'll get 98x. Okay, so technically our remainder is 98x minus 96. So when I account for that in my answer, the quotient plus the remainder divided by the divisor, I'll do plus 98x minus 96 divided by our divisor, x squared plus 2. And again, because we did get a remainder, I know that x squared plus 2 is not a factor of this 4th degree polynomial. If the remainder was 0, then I could say that it was, in fact, a factor.